I want to go to the whole DMT concept, because we know how, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know that our students are having out-of-body, profound mystical healing experiences, sometimes in the body, sometimes out of the body. And I am, from having an experience with plant medicines, I've sat with sacred medicines in many countries, did my journey in Peru, and really had the experience of psychedelic medicines one-on-one in sacred ceremonial ways. And I know that I have, and our students also have, what they report to be full-on DMT, out-of-body, profoundly healing mystical experiences. And so I'm under the, my hypothesis is my desire now to work with my clinical team is to be able to measure dimethyltryptamine within bloodstream following such a breathwork experience. So just excited to be able to quantify that more, but I want to get your take on this. And when we talk DMT, the God particle, spirit molecule, full on out of body, going home, remembering who we are as unconditional love type experiences on command. What's your take on that when it comes to DMT and what you've seen in your students possible and what they've experienced when it comes to using breath to have such experiences?
Yeah. So I like to look at breath as like a pharmacy, right? So you can lower your blood pressure, you can create anti-inflammatories, you can unblock your nose, you can fix constipation, all the things you go to the pharmacy for. But you can also, because some drugs also take you into psychonaut land, right? You can have those experiences too, right? So pranayama has all of these techniques. So things like holotropic rebirthing you may have heard of, they all come from pranayama originally, right? All these breathing techniques you see on the mainstream now are all originally from tantric yoga and pranayama, right? So now, funny thing is, my mum always said to me, if you study really hard, one day you can go to Cambridge University. But actually, Cambridge University are studying us on exactly this subject, on what's really going on, the why behind why our techniques create such predictable results of this transformation, taking people into altered states, profound oneness connection, spiritual states that are a lot like taking psilocybin or doing ayahuasca, right? So we actually had a small study done because I want to talk to you about the mechanism, the science. We did a small study with a neuroscientist, quite a respected one called Jeff Tarrant, and he showed that that we create measurable changes in the brain that are very similar to what happens after a dose of psilocybin or MDMA that's used therapeutically for fixing severe depression. Okay, so they compared our technique, a 22-minute session, just 22 minutes, with psilocybin and MDMA brain maps, okay? And he found that there was very little difference in the changes of the brain. And what it works with profoundly is the default mode network, okay? So the default mode network is the part of the brain that is always worrying about the future, the past, okay? And it's the worrying part of the brain. It's the dreamy, creative part, but what happens in a default mode network determines the quality of life. So if you're constantly worrying all the time with anxiety, right, and it's very active, that part of the brain, it's hard for you to be present, and you tend to sometimes get disassociated, and also you end up getting all the stress and tension and high blood pressure and all this because you think it, you will it into your being, right? So what severe psilocybin and MDMA use for severe depression, right? What they do is they actually quieten down the activity of the default mode network, right? So psilocybin in particular, what it does is it suppresses blood flow to certain regions of the brain, which then creates a disconnection that stops you thinking and worrying so much about future past events, and you end up in a different altered space, right? That's the mechanism.
Is this related to transient hypofrontality, flow state?
Yeah.
Same concept, slowing down the prefrontal cortex?
No, that's kind of different. This is more to do with the default mode. So this is the worrying, the contemplating part of the brain that gets hung up on the future past, which is what causes people to get depressed, actually, because that part of the brain is like self-critical all the time. And it's like just going round and round, they can't control it, right? So, so what happens with breath work and why it works the same way is it also, hyperventilation, right, can also suppress parts of the brain, because hyperventilation, and actually chronic hyperventilation, is the cause of a lot of disease in the world, right? When people breathe way too fast, more than they need to, with bad breathing habits, like mouth breathing. But in a controlled manner, controlled hyperventilation can actually make you shut off regions of the brain, which is the same way that things like DMT works, okay? And in fact, DMT comes out to play when there's low blood oxygen levels, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That then stabilizes brain cells which are starving oxygen. So that's one of the roles of DMT. So what we're doing with chronic hyperventilation, controlled hyperventilation, is we're suppressing the breath, because the oxygen to get into the brain cells, because when you breathe out lots of CO2 is what gets the oxygen from red blood cells into the cells, right?
Yeah.
That you need, the body tissue cells. So if you have less CO2 because you're hyperventilating, breathing too fast, you get suppressed blood flow and you get vasoconstriction and less blood flow going to certain regions of the brain. Usually it's those regions that deal with your sense of self that go first, quiet down first. Now, if it's too extreme and not everyone's kind of on the same level, it can actually cause too much of that happening, and people can get very ungrounded and get very spaced out and actually end up getting traumatized as a result. So there's some problems with chronic hyperventilation. And it's not my preferred choice. They're very fast breathing techniques. So there's other ways to do the same. Now, the most revered technique in pranayama is Kumbhaka, breath retention, right? And actually the science of pranayama, that's a whole nother interview, is all about, if you look at real original traditional yoga, the way it's done, where it's all about controlling the breath, functional contraction, where you're really exercising with reduced blood flow to your muscles and things, that type of exercise and breathing techniques of pranayama, which revolves around breath retention, what it does, it makes you super efficient at using oxygen, which means you can hold your breath for long periods of time. And if you can hold your breath for long periods of time, if you have a slow breathing rate, actually you prevent oxidative stress. You actually reduce the risk of oxidative stress, and that has an anti-aging effect, right?
Yes,
for the long term. Now, when you get really good at breath retention, you can hold your breath for 60, 90 seconds and beyond after an exhale, right? You get into these low oxygen, systemic low blood oxygen states called intermittent hypoxia. When you do it for long enough, right, you can wake up endogenous stem cells, very small embryonic like stem cells. They have the power to turn into any other cell in the body, lower inflammation, create healing, right? They are stimulated.
Wake up embryonic stem cells.
Very small embryonic stem cells.
Anti-aging one-on-one.
Yeah. This is what is the mechanism of why we get such miraculous healing effects, dramatic, rapid healing from our techniques.
So you mean on a physical level, it's the awakening of ancient, basically dormant life force energy stuck that are being reinvigorated as youthfulness is spread out through the body again, kind of thing?
Yeah. And then when you get to lower and lower oxygen levels, that's when the real psychedelic effects happen. And you get into blissful samadhi, nirvana-like states. The states of being that were talked about by the ancient mystics, right? So when you do that, because carbon dioxide raises up, carbon dioxide, when you hold your breath after the exhale, you allow CO2 to eventually rise. CO2 actually has a blissful feeling. That's why you when you have a panic attack, you breathe through a paper bag. It calms you down and makes you feel like a little bit more relaxed. Because CO2 actually calms you down, makes you feel more blissed. It works with nitric oxide, which also wakes up everything, dilates, makes you feel bliss. Oxygen actually constricts and makes you feel tense. So when you do the breathing exercises, which is all about breath retention, holding your breath, right? What happens is actually you can get into blissful psychedelic states rather than that painful catharsis that can happen with chronic hyperventilation. And this, especially when you do rhythmic breathing with it, when you keep everything in a rhythm, you create a state of coherence and balance. And when you do breath retentions and train yourself to have long breath retentions, you get into these beautiful, blissful states. So with SOMA Breath, we really revolve and focus on this. And we take people into bliss and nirvana and psychedelic states that are more like bliss and nirvana, more like cannabis rather than hardcore, you know, LSD, chemical LSD. And I look at like certain breath practices more like synthetic LSD, like too much of it, where you lose control and you can't control the trip, versus what we do, the way we do it, and take people into these psychedelic states, more like really good sativa, right, or indica, or very pleasurable like MDMA or psilocybin done in the right way states. So do you get what I'm saying? It's like there's one way, there's two ways of doing psychedelic states of breath work, and I believe that the way we do it is just more pleasurable, and we see this. But you also get all of the other benefits of improved oxygen efficiency, increased CO2 tolerance, which are all things, you know, lower breathing rates, slower breathing rates, which are all things associated with longevity, anti-aging, waking up endogenous stem cells, and all this stuff.
I just had that. This is brilliant. I just had a little thought. And it was kind of like, you look at, you know, some of the incredible yogis over the time, they've lived hundreds and hundreds of years. And some of them are just, I mean, you look at it and go, no, it's not possible. You can't live that long because of this and that. And then we hear the stories of the incredible ones that sat in caves and, you know, came out younger and younger and lived for hundreds of years. This would, in theory, for me, be the science behind if you can rejuvenate the body through dormant stem cells and do this kind of work, and also function on energy rather than, you know, for example, digestive energy. That would make sense. That's a really cool concept.
I can back that up with a little bit of science as well. So Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, says the perfect human breathes like they don't breathe at all, right? So if you reverse engineer that, what he means is that your breathing rate's so slow and shallow, right, and subtle, that you're so efficient in using oxygen, you hardly need any oxygen. So if you hardly need to breathe, right, that means you have a good balance of CO2, you make energy very efficiently in the body. That also means then you have less oxidative stress, because imagine the mitochondria are all little engines, combustion engines, burning oxygen. If you have a very inefficient engine, right, you become more like a finely tuned Tesla that runs forever without making any noise, right? Silent breath, right? So people who huff and puff, who have wheezy breath, noisy breath, breathe through their mouth, they tend to have bad health. People who huff tend to have really good health. And then here's the other thing. So if you look at the animal kingdom, animals that live a long time, elephants, turtles, right? Whales, they hold their breath for long periods. Like a whale holds its breath for like 2 hours at a time, lives at 200, has extremely slow breathing rates, 1 breath per minute, right? And but animals that live not very long time, like 1 or 2 years, like rats and mice, they have a fast breathing rate, 150 to 300 breaths per minute, right? They don't hold their breath at all, and they only live like a year. The naked mole rat, they live, right, for 30 years plus, free of disease, really robust creatures. And guess what? They are rats, but they live primarily underground in hypoxic environments, right? And they hold their 18 minutes at a time. Now, talking about conscious breathing, right? Humans have the ability to train themselves and choose to breathe like whales and elephants, or be like rats on the rat race. Now, which one are you going to choose?
Oh, mate, this is beautiful. My breath is slowing down as we speak.
Exactly.
Okay. Last question for you, brother. This is a big one, exciting for me. When we teach our breath work, it is often that we have all these different kinds of experiences of healing and psychedelic type kind of experiences. One thing I've also noticed, and I've had these experiences by doing yours on YouTube. In a moment, guys, we're going to drop some information. Just, you know, for now, go to SOMA Breath, YouTube, and do some of the work. 2 of my favorites, morning gratitude meditation. and the meditation to meet the higher self, or meditation for the higher self, 20-30 minutes approximately. Be in a state, in a space where you can relax, good speakers, listen, breathe, go all in. And I think I know you're going to have some quite interesting and beautiful experiences, or at least very interesting experiences, depending on where you're at in your life. But really love your work, bro. Here's what I've seen. A lot of our students, we talk about spirit, right? And we talk about potentially being spirits infused in human forms. We're more than just physical. We know this through quantum physics now, metaphysics. We're a tiny % physical, and majority of us is just pure consciousness, right? And so when we take our students through this breath, we do this 3-day quantum advanced seminar, and we heal through the blockages. We use part of the Bhagavad Gita lineage type systems, healing the fear, the guilt, the shame, the grief, basically removing the energetic block to the specific energy center. Spiraling from the bottom to the top. And when we get to the top and we've opened up, the nadis and the systems accordingly, our students often have these powerful experiences when the crown opens, if you will. This is the way we facilitate it in one of our breaths.
Amazing.
It's super cool. I'd love to run you through it one day, bro.
Do it, please.
Wow. And so what happens, and this is regular again and predictable again, is that they actually, and I want to, predict what's happening, but they are able to access superhuman states beyond the ones that we've even discussed today, which is having conversations with loved ones that have passed over, going to source, receiving the message that they needed. And this is regular. And sometimes we've got to be really special and sacred within our work, but sometimes they have the conversation that they're waiting for 30 years. They were with their mother that has passed again, and they were held again, and they got the exact message that they needed. And I know if you look at levels, layers, dimensions, whatever, they certainly leave the standard part of the human experience and have experiences that can only be explained. I can't explain it scientifically, rather than they're able to access high states of consciousness of which they can meet their loved ones, or angels, archangels, whatever might be dwelling in different dimensions, or whatever it might be. I cannot say for sure, but I wanted kind of to share your take on that, because I've had powerful experiences with your breath. And what do you think happens? I'm trying to, I can explain it to my patients and students by the fact that when you increase energy, frequency, and vibration to a higher level, you're able to access different states of consciousness, of which this information is, of course, there and available. But I wanted to see if you've had similar type experiences, and how you think the breath could, quote unquote, take someone's consciousness out of the physical vessel to have a profound experience of the supernatural that they know to be true for them. And then, obviously get them safely into their bodies again, if you will. But through the spiritual aspect, if we end on that note, how do you think this breath is potentially a bridge to who we are, or accessing these levels of consciousness? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it really depends on how you want to explain it, because there's many different models of reality, right? So there's going to be the very materialistic Richard Dawkins atheist model of reality. And the way he'll explain that is that what it is just your brain hallucinating and coming up with stories, right? And it's all materialistic, and there's no such thing as God and stuff like that, right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, because it's really hard to say what's right or wrong, you can't prove anything. And the problem with atheists as well, like someone like Richard Dawkins, is that they're more fundamentalist sometimes and more religious than the ones that they're calling out, right? The religious people they're calling out. So it's become a religion. So, but they believe their belief system so much. So let's explore that belief system. Well, you could say that our brain is just like a tool for us to understand, interpret information that's being fed to us. So all we're doing is we're kind of making a dream fantasy story to create a message that helps us make a better decision moving forward in our life, maybe, right? To free us from some kind of old repetitive program that's running. That's the material. Yeah. So it's like, okay, that's all it is. That's what they'll say. Now, if you go into the realms of like spirituality and things like that, there are different levels of consciousness. There's the consciousness of, you know, every cell in your body, right? The somatic intelligence and the consciousness of this reality, the 3D reality, and then there's the 4D. There's a level of consciousness which connects everyone, the Carl Jung collective consciousness. Then there's the 5D, which is the beyond this world, all right, and going into universal consciousness, okay? And so the theory goes that when you get into like deeper brainwave states, you start to change the transmitter that you tune into, okay? You can tune into this level of consciousness or go into the universal consciousness, and that's when you start to get different thought and different ideas and creativity and pluck things from the ether, which goes beyond space and time.
Exactly.
And if you do something like ayahuasca, right, properly, like I've only done it once, but it was the most profound hallucinogenic spiritual experience of my life. Nothing has even come close to it, right? Because I'm not a very visual person, actually. I'm more auditory kinesthetic. And people who are very visual tend to, in breathwork experiences, have similar visions as they do on psilocybin, right? I don't get that so much, but when I did ayahuasca, it was beyond a doubt that there was, in my mind, even though it could be just me making shit up, right? That there was a spiritual force, a world that exists beyond this reality. So I was literally visited by an angel who gave me the meaning of life and so much more. With it was like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There were all these little dwarf entities, and they were basically preparing me for what I'm going through now. Actually, I got it when I first got the symptoms of colitis. I didn't even know I had ulcerative colitis, and what they gave me, the message was that you're going to go through an incredible transformation now, and you need to be prepared for it and what's going to happen. And then it was a lot of forgiveness about the past, super profound. But it was so clear, right, that it seemed like for sure in my mind that there is a other world that we can tap into when we are open to it. And I think the mystics, what they are able to do is to enter into these realms with or without substances. Maybe they do it with the breath or not, or together is very powerful. We do sometimes these, I call them breathing light experiences with a small dose of psilocybin, which is the most profound awakenings I've ever seen, right? So what happens is then you become an adept. The adepts are the mystics who are able to explore other realms and learn and dissect information from those realms to aid the growth and the strength of the tribe, and use it for the greater good beyond them. So they're the conduit from that world to this world. That's what the true shamans are. Now everyone's a shaman. They think they're shamans, but the real adepts are the ones who can go into that world, speak with all these entities, the good ones, and be guided by the light, right? That's the true shamans. That's what the original Siberian shamans would do with their, you know, amanita mushrooms and things like that. So the SOMA, the original SOMA, right? So breathwork and breathing techniques were like kind of not always a replacement for it. They were like a and rather than or, when the shamans really were very adept with the drugs. Well, not drugs, like plant medicines. You know, when they knew how to use it, the right context. But if you don't know how to do it, if you think of it that there is another world out there, you can also be possessed by the wrong entities, right? And I've seen this happen where people delve into these realms by tapping into these universal consciousness states, right? And then end up actually becoming worse as a person than they were before, right? And this happens a lot.
It's a powerful realm to play in. Hey, there's a lot of stuff happening there.